Oh, to grace, how great a debtor daily I'm constrained to be. Let thy goodness like a fetter tie my wondering heart to thee. Prone to wonder, Lord, I feel it. Prone to leave the God I love. Here's our hearts, Lord. Take and seal them. Seal them for your courts above. Please be seated. So I'm going to own up to something that is a bit embarrassing. I have no sense of direction. Basically none. And if you, I want you to hear me right. It's not that I have a bad sense of direction, for that would suggest that I had some sense of direction. I'm pretty sure I actually have about none. You know that saying where they say, that guy could mess up a 2-car funeral? I myself, I can't find the funeral. I have a PhD in getting lost, an Academy Award in best on-road performance with no direction. It's not too much to say, I don't think, that Garmin came into being because Eric Long came into being. When Shelley and I first moved into our apartment as newlyweds in Kansas City, I was following Shelley home one evening, and I got caught at a stoplight near the house. Shelley loves to tell this story of waiting for me, because I should have been right behind her, but then looking for where I was and happening to see my car going down the wrong street and up the other and back, turning around in people's driveways and all the rest, and me looking all around, lost as I could be, but the entire time within actual eyesight of our house, and just filling my new bride with decades worth of ammunition for ridicule. Now, this, I can't find my back end with the GPS syndrome, it exposed itself in my life at the exact same time that my driver's license exposed itself in my life. I didn't know it existed before because the skills had really never been needed. That seems to be the cruelest part of this malady. It hides in silence like that, only to expose itself at the worst moment, on the darkest night, on the most backcountry road when no one else is around in some strange dark age past, like before cell phones. And it was weird that when I started driving, would many times get lost driving routes that I had been on countless times with my parents. But I quickly came to see that there is a great deal of difference between driving a certain place even 1,000,000 times as a passenger and then finding your own way when you are the driver. There's all the difference in the world between sitting in a car while someone else makes all the decisions and you just passively go along for the ride, and knowing every single turn and what fork to take and what landmark to watch out for. There's just all the difference in the world between someone else doing everything for you and you doing it for yourself. Now, up until today in Matthew's gospel, the disciples have been passengers in the car, so to speak. They're just kind of along for the ride. Jesus has been doing all the driving, and we think, well, that sounds right. Jesus, take the wheel. I mean, it's a song after all. And so our passage starts with Jesus going from town to town, preaching and proclaiming the good news and curing disease. And we think, well, right, good for Jesus. That's what Jesus is supposed to be doing. That's Jesus' job. But all of a sudden, things change because Jesus then asks folks very much like you and me, to join in this work, to engage in the same activities, to do the exact same sort of stuff, to suffer the same consequences. And we think, I don't know about all that. I don't know if you noticed Jesus, but I like my religion like I like my salad dressing on the side. I mean, see, it's one thing for Jesus to be about all this because Jesus is the Messiah. The disciples don't mind announcing him as that, and we with them will sing it in song and say it in creed and prayer. But what if Jesus won't just leave it there for us? I mean, what if Jesus wants to do something with that confession in your life? I mean, what if we're driving along and Jesus says, Eric, take the wheel? Or Dan, or Pat, or Barbara, or Sue, or any of you? I mean, that'd be weird, I guess, because that's not how the song goes, we think. And yet here we are today, hearing exactly that take place with these disciples. And they're just regular, easily lost in life sort of folk, like us. But here we are, hearing about these disciples who have enjoyed being along for the ride with Jesus, making all the decisions and handling all the tricky moments and steering everybody through all of the would-be fender benders and all the rest, taking all the criticism and always right there in the front. But now they're being asked to take the wheel. Now, let's state the obvious. There is really nothing more natural than for us to take a back seat. I mean, for one, we look at this world and we see all of these massive, God-sized problems. I mean, in the best of times, which we don't seem to be in, but in the best of times, life is hard and can be painful and lonely, and it has all of the things about just living life in human skin with one another that come up. And that's way before we get to the divisiveness of this time and the violence that we see day in and day out, the scariness of the world about us. And we look at all of that, and then we realize, little human-sized us, and we go, okay, well, what are we supposed to do about all of that? It's best just to kind of hang back, stay back. I mean, I get too lost trying to navigate through all that. I mean, isn't that why we've got the Son of God, the Prince of Peace, King of Kings, Emmanuel, God with us, to take on all of that stuff for us? Yes, but he's insistent that he isn't going to only be the one at all of this, that he's going to have us at this as well. That is, if we're actually going to follow him. Which, by the way, is one of the most outrageous but simply beautiful things to me about Jesus. He's always picking ordinary people like us to do his world-changing work. And it seems he actually trusts us with it. Convinced that we're not going to get lost, convinced that through his strength we'll actually find the way for a world that has clearly lost its way, that has no sense of direction. And so it's no longer just Jesus at the wheel. It's now you. Some years ago, I heard comedian Dennis Miller doing a stand-up routine a very long time ago. And I don't remember anything funny. I don't even remember this part being funny, but I do remember what he said, because what he said was that he would never be a Christian. Not so much because of Jesus, but because Jesus' followers, to him, we all sound like a bunch of losers. He'd say, when he'd hear us, we'd talk about my life was falling apart, my marriage was falling apart, I had substance abuse issues, all the other sorts of things, and I turned to Jesus and he saved me. I guess to him, this sounded like a crutch, people not being able to find their way in that sort of way just, made us sound like losers. Now, this was way before Dennis Miller very, publicly failed on Monday Night Football, if you remember that. And so now he may want to be in the Losers Club because guess what? We all get a time there. This isn't about how great we are. This isn't about, in any way, our perfection, believe me. See, what Miller misses is that Jesus somehow is so confident in his work and his Spirit, which he is pouring into the world through his people in this thing called church. And he's so sure of the ultimate success of his mission that he doesn't mind even enlisting folks like us into this task. See, Jesus' mission is big enough to even include us. If we just believe that God is big enough to overcome the very many deficiencies we bring along. The challenge for us is to see ourselves as Jesus sees us. Entrusted, empowered, enlisted, co-workers in the very reign of God. People who don't just pray, but actually live their lives, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. That make this prayer into the very work of their lives. And even though we could never find our way on our own to all of that, through him we somehow do find the way. And he's entrusting us with helping the world that he loves to find its way as well. You may carry your deficiencies like me very prominently and without question, and yet please do notice that Jesus still is calling us, sometimes even despite us. So what would that look like for us? I think it might look like a group of teenagers and adult volunteers deciding to give away a week of their summer to go work for people in great need. I'm sure that our young people could figure out something else to do with a week, something cooler all the way around, even literally. And yet somehow they have the crazy notion that if they do something, the world could be different. They see and they act. Did you notice that both of our scripture lessons started with seeing? Jesus saw the masses, but not as masses. He saw them as people. And they looked to him as abused and like sheep without a shepherd. And seeing them, he called us in to help. Abraham stands at the door of his tent, and he sees 3 strangers. And although with strangers he has every reason to fear, he sees the possibility of something more, and so he invites them in and makes this lavish meal for them, and what he finds is that he's just invited in God to his very presence. These angelic visitors tell them that God's promise for his life is not done, and although it sounds like a big joke to Sarah, the joke turns on them because God is going to use them to change the world, and he's still doing it because here we are today, sons and daughters of Abraham and Sarah. What does it look like? It looks like seeing the world in a new way, seeing other people with new eyes, and then acting on that because you see. Now, like Sarah, you might want to laugh at the very thought that God's promise to the world could be born through your life. You might initially scoff with her at the notion that God's blessings for the entire world are intended to somehow come through you, but let me be blunt. God's good intentions for the world utterly include you doing and being. Moreover, this church and what we do for the world, it will never be sufficient without you. It's just that simple. We can never be who Jesus says we are to be and do what Jesus says we are to do without every member of this church doing what they're called by Jesus to do and be. You're that central to God's plans. Now, will it cost you? You bet your life it will. And it should, because it's worthy of something big. It's worthy of you. Will you run your car into a dead end or two? Maybe. But I've noticed that Jesus has a remarkable capacity for dealing with dead ends. Will it be the best thing that you could ever do with your life? You bet your life. To change metaphors, God's calling you off the bench into the game. None of us are star players, but the winning team's already established, which means there's no reason not to have at it. So have at it. Quit laughing that God would entrust so much to you and realize it's not really you alone anyway. It's always Him working through you. And so you will never get lost because He is the greatest GPS for your life that there is. And through His power, the destination He has in mind for you is one you can never get lost getting to as long as you get there through Him. So, move on over into the driver's seat. You've got this. Amen.